Thank you and good evening. I heard a story one time about a man who stood up in front of a group of people and he said, "My name is Tex, and I haven't found it necessary to take a drink or a mood-altering drug since September 2nd, 1972. And a friend of his who was listening stood up and said out loud in front of everybody there, he said, "Tex, I saw you drunk the day before yesterday." He said, "That's right, but it wasn't necessary." Well, it's a kind of humorous way to begin the tale of a tragedy. He said he had been sober from such and such a date, but he obviously had been drinking since then. And I'd like to just share a few thoughts tonight about a very ordinary phenomenon in the world of alcoholism. It goes by many names: relapse, slip, road test, further research, whatever you wish to call it. Forgetting all the psychological parts, let's just define a slip or a relapse as the return to drinking after a period of sobriety. The return to drinking is a return to complete insanity. And believe it or not, that is the insanity that Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA, was referring to in step 2 when he referred to the insanity of the alcoholic. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could return us to sanity. I heard that man speak once, and I heard him define what he meant by that. He was not referring to the goofy things people do when they're drunk. Non-alcoholics who get drunk do crazy things. They're acting in a drugged condition. He explained, I heard him with his own lips, that the insanity of the alcoholic is when he is physically sober. He picks up the first drink of the next series of drinks, and that is totally irrational, insane behavior, to go back to consuming a drug that is killing him. Insanity. And the insanity is partially explained by this. With one swallow, the alcoholic, no matter how many years sober, is catapulted back into the hell from which he came in the first place. There is instant return to a life of living a lie, to the total dishonesty. Usually, the relapse has begun in hiding. I remember a friend we learned from a friend of his that he had been drinking. So instead of asking him and almost begging him to lie, I simply let him know that we knew he had been drinking, but he would admit only as much as he thought we knew. It is almost a pitiable situation to watch a human being who had enjoyed so many years of sobriety go back to that horrible life of a lie that was his when he was drinking originally. It really is insane. There are many, many things that go against staying sober. 4 of the basic enemies of sobriety: youth, health, wealth, and brains. And the most dangerous is brains. I once heard a man say that the man who saved his life gave him the finest piece of advice he had ever learned. You do not need brains to get sober, you need desire. And I've seen people's intellects kill them. Number 1 is figuring, maybe I can handle it. I remember once out in the Midwest, a woman who was in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous came up to me after a talk one night and she said, "Please pray for my father." 33 years sober. He picked up a drink, and she said his shame prevents him from returning. This is the tragedy of relapse. Some make it back, and some don't. Now, my friends, it is a simple fact of life that in our era, about half of the people who come into treatment or enter AA are repeaters. What can be done for them? Is there any way at all that we can learn a little bit about relapse, or that we can examine it to learn something from it and perhaps prevent another? I think that there is. You know, the first thing, we say it's a disease, and the part of the disease really that gets the least attention is the physical part. Alcoholism by nature is a physical thing. It's a biochemical addiction to a drug. But its repercussions are so horrible that we concentrate on the results to such a degree that even the big book of AA gives the most scientifically accurate, descriptive definition of the disease when it refers to it as soul sickness. But we must never, never, never forget that its basis is physical. It is a biochemical addiction to a drug. And so the body is the source of the whole thing. Sometimes the body has been damaged, let's say through 10, 15, 20, 25 years of drinking. It has been damaged to such an extent that when the compulsion to drink sets in, it simply overcomes the desire to not drink. And isn't it strange how some people condemn those who have a slip? Have you ever heard this cruelty? Well, what step were you working when this happened? That has nothing to do with it. AA warns its sons and daughters, do not become overly tired, do not become overly hungry. It can create something in there which might set up a compulsion to drink, which overcomes the desire to stay sober. This is very real, very real. I don't know as it's addressed too often. When you function with a drugged brain for 15 years, it takes a long time for reason to go back. That's why AA it's the most wise therapy on earth. You know what she says to the victims of this disease? Just bring the body. You don't have to understand why you do certain things, you just have to do them. After a while, the mind will catch up as it gets well enough to do so. It's just so sad when we condemn very early members for having relapses. Let me share something with you. I heard a fellow down south give a talk to a great, huge room full of people. There are a lot of youngsters, brand new to sobriety, in the room, and he made this statement. He said, I am sober 17 years. How many of you are sober under a year? A lot of hands went up. He said, do you know that my chances of staying sober are hundreds of times greater than yours? He said, I have had 17 years of sobriety, 17 years of meetings, 17 years of trying to help others, 17 years of listening to the wisdom of others, 17 years of letting my love of AA grow. You're brand new, you're still wobbly. Then he made this statement. Now let's have a slip. Your chances of coming back are hundreds of times greater than my chances. He said, I don't know if I'm worthy to have a chance to come back. God has given me so much. It was a very frightening thing. I've never heard it put that way, but it certainly makes us think, doesn't it? It is said in AA, what I've said so many times, the attitude is the father of the action. And so we say stinking thinking precedes the drinking. The thinking. The greatest mental obstacle to recovery is denial. Now, we've all seen it in treatment centers. Some people simply don't believe they're alcoholics. I do not believe this. I'm waiting to get out, and I'm going to drink. I remember once, I've used this so many times, this was years and years ago, a man in a hospital in Baltimore, in a semi-coma on his deathbed, opened his eyes in a brief moment of lucidity and said to 4 AA members who were standing around his bed, they had tried for years to help this man, and he said this, I can handle this. He closed his eyes in death. Those are the last words he spoke on this earth. And the tragedy is he believed them. He believed them. He honestly believed that he could handle his drinking. He had no problem with it, and it killed him. But there's another type of denial. We see it often, and I'm sure you have. I knew a man who killed himself because of it. I know I'm playing amateur psychiatrist, but I know I'm right in this. The man was an alcoholic. And he did know it. He knew it beyond any shadow of a doubt. He just didn't want to be one. He wanted to drink and be able to handle it, and he couldn't. And his anger at the situation took itself out on everybody else. He was just an angry man. He was angry at God, he was angry at his wife, he was angry at his family, he was angry at people he knew, he was angry at people he didn't know. And he wound up taking his own life. There's a lot of tragedy wrapped up in this. Then the big ones, resentment and self-pity. The co-founder of AA said these words, and they're scary. Resentment and self-pity are luxuries that the alcoholic can ill afford. Resentment and self-pity, unless faced and handled, or at least an attempt to handle them is made, have often resulted in a return to drinking. They tell a lovely story of a fellow in an AA meeting one night. He was chairing the meeting. It was on resentments. He said, let's talk about resentments tonight. How many of you have resentments against anybody on earth? Every hand in the room went up. He looked around and discovered except one. It was an old duffer, 93 years old, sitting in the back. He thought, well, I don't know, maybe he didn't hear me. How many of you resent no one on earth? The old fellow stood up. He said, you don't resent anybody? The old man said, no, I don't. I said, how come? He said, I outlived them all. It was the only... Impatience. Impatience with sobriety. Why am I not making progress? Why do I feel this way? Why don't I have the serenity he does? Why is my family not cooperating better? Why don't I have the support of my husband, my wife, my children? Why? Impatience with the program. Why isn't this thing working? I'm miserable. Where's all this serenity people are yakking about? And when we let that prey on our minds, then you become preoccupied with it. Frustration. I'm trying my best and they don't believe me. When will alcoholics ever realize the hundreds of broken promises? You may know that it's different this time, but it's going to take your loved ones a long time to come around to realize it. Do you know how you can be trusted? By becoming trustworthy. You stay sober today, and when tomorrow comes, you do the same thing. And when the next day comes, you do the same thing. You build up a couple of years of that, maybe people will begin to trust again. But we become so impatient, we want tomorrow yesterday. Cockiness. It's a sad thing to watch someone creep into AA, afraid to lift his or her eyes up to look others in the eye, and after 3 months walking around like the cock of the walk. It's almost scary because I think it includes a kind of a presumption on God's grace to keep me sober even though I want to walk around the edges. I think it's skating on thin ice. I think it's playing Russian roulette mentally. It's like the Irishman was ice skating, on some thin ice, and he went through. And a buddy of his said, well, how did you come to fall through the ice? He said, I didn't come to fall through the ice. I came to skate. Speaking of Irishmen, I ever tell you about the Irishman who was visiting the Holy Land? He got to the Sea of Galilee, and he said to the boatman, "What will it cost to get to the other side?" He said, $250. "Good Lord," he said, "what a price." The fellow said, "You have to remember this is the sea that our Lord walked on." He said, "At them prices, no wonder he walked." Complacency. What a disease that is. My friends, sobriety is a gift. It's a gift, and it has to be held on to with desire and at a price. Complacency is just dangerous. It's frightening. It's the emotional or mental disease of the elderly in AA. I have my years behind me. I'm safe. Oh, they don't say that. But it's something that unconsciously kind of creeps in, and you're unaware of it. And that's the insidious part of it, when the one who suffers it is unaware of it. It's a very, very dangerous thing. Depression, I don't even want to get into that. That is an illness of its own. Somebody once defined, I think some professionals define depression as frozen anger, and I think it's frozen self-pity. I went through a summer of depression in 1970 for 3 solid months. If you can believe this, I did not want to leave a dark room. And it is the most horrible thing I think I have ever experienced. You are conscious of nothing except your own pain. And I think it was only the protection of my family, Tommy and May, and their son Alex, that kept me alive. That kept me alive. Oddly enough, I didn't think of a drink, but if I had and did not have the protection, God knows what would have happened to me. Internal criticism of others. It's awfully, awfully easy to criticize the decisions of people. It's easy to criticize speakers. Have you ever met some convention goers and banquet goers? Go to any convention anywhere on earth, you'll see them. And they rate speakers.
He was good, but he wasn't as good as the fellow last year.
What do you mean he wasn't as good? You mean his delivery or his... Well, he didn't have too good a story. His story is his story. What else can it be? You don't invent a life to thrill the listener. And yet, there can be a tendency, I have it, we all have it, to listen to the speaker instead of what is spoken, to listen to the messenger's tone and inflection instead of the message. That's awfully hard to do. You spend a lifetime trying. Distrust. I don't like to be distrusted myself. And I'm sure you don't. And it's a terrible thing when we begin to distrust the motives of others. I've often said that the emotional pain of having your motives misjudged is the sharpest kind of pain. I receive a lot of letters. Many of them are very lovely, they're very gratifying, they're very complimentary. In my life, I have received about 5 hate letters, and they almost destroyed me. People simply judged my motives. I knew they were wrong, but this is what they believed about me, and it just hurt. And a kind of a basic mental dishonesty. We'll see that when it is spelled out in the behavior. Thinking precedes the behavior. It is the attitude that is the father of the action. All these internal things here, how do they spell themselves out? If I'm in denial and I do not believe that I have the problem, I hang around slippery people and slippery places. How often have you worked with somebody who keeps getting drunk? You say, my heavens, no wonder, look where you go. You stick your head in the oven, complain because it's warm. You go into bars and wonder why you're tempted. It's a weird thing. Don't you see that there has to be some damage up here for them not to see that? And this is why AA constantly tells its sons and daughters, just do these things. You don't have to understand them. You just have to understand that I understand them. Follow directions. Argumentativeness and criticism. At some meetings, there are individuals in whose eyes nobody can do anything right. Nobody can say anything right. I believe God would have a tough time if he were a member of the group. And there's a kind of, you've seen this, a withdrawal, avoiding sponsors, avoiding groups, avoiding meetings. You've heard it. Have you ever heard someone say, hey, where's old George? I haven't seen him for a couple of weeks. I say, where's Susie? I haven't seen her around any. Has anybody talked with her lately? When you begin this goofiness up here and you're thinking about maybe being able to drink, you stay away from people who want to tell you you can't. And then there's this phenomenon that happens. We even see it in people who are actively in treatment. Well, yes, I think I have a drinking problem. It's perfectly all right to smoke some pot. Or the pot smoker who says it's all right to drink a beer. That is so dangerous. When you're addicted, you're addicted. There is a kind of an idea in the minds of some, anything goes as long as you don't drink. Which means the world is a sexual playground. Other people's money is up for grabs. It's a basic dishonesty that spells itself out in dishonest behavior. And then, and I'm sure that you have all experienced this, when a person becomes really half goofy up here, they come to a point where they absolutely refuse to do the things that are essential to staying sober. Just absolutely refuse it. Now, I want you to help me. And I say, don't come to me because I'm going to tell you what I told you 1,000 times. Get back to your meetings. No, I can't get sober that way. They call to you for help and then dictate their own therapy. I will not do what you tell me to do, but I want you to help me. What they want you to do is hold their hand. And ladies and gentlemen, as irritated as we can become at all of this, can't you see that the decisions that they're making and the statements that are coming out of them are the results of absolutely sick thinking, damaged thinking? Well, this behavior leads to this. Ultimately, the drink is picked up, swallowed, and the trip to hell is immediate. Can anything be done about all this? Is there any hope for repeaters? Well, you know the old saying, where there's life, there's hope. Of course. There are certain things and precautions that can help. Number one is basics. You and I know Alcoholics Anonymous is the prime therapy for this particular disease. And so, get a home group, go to its meetings, and try to live its principles as stated in the steps. That's absolutely essential. If somebody wants to refuse to do these things, he has almost sentenced himself to a relapse. Sponsorship. Every spiritual writer who ever wrote demanded spiritual guidance. There is no aspect of human life in which sanity and insanity are closer together than in the spiritual life. In the name of heavens, my friends, I do need you and you do need me. If we were both self-sufficient and I had all the answers to my problems, I wouldn't need you. And if you were self-sufficient, you wouldn't need me. But God Almighty didn't build us that way. No one is judge in his own case. That's why popes need confessors and presidents need cabinets. And that's why you and I need guidance. AA refers to it as sponsorship. Get a sponsor. And if you do not have one at this point in your life, you are already on dangerous grounds. Do you know why? Since I'm not judge in my own case, I cannot see what is visible to others. These things are so plain when we see them in others, we can't see them in ourselves. It's the way we're made. I need to place myself, my life, the guidance of my life, in the hands of someone in whose judgment I have complete confidence. To be a sponsor, I think that a lot of sponsorship is purely social. Sponsorship means that you have another life in your hands. You have an obligation, a stark obligation, to help another see when he's walking into dangerous grounds. And perhaps also an obligation to kind of give a little pat on the back when he's walking steady. Follow directions. The third thing is absolutely essential to sobriety. Absolutely essential. Gratitude. I've heard it said over the years, if you do this, you'll get drunk. If you do that, you'll get drunk. If you do the other thing, you get drunk. I know people that do a whole lot of things and don't get drunk. I do not admire their sobriety, but that's neither here nor there. You cannot be an ingrate and remain sober. That is impossible. I once heard it said that gratitude is the hinge on which the sober life swings. The man who said that said this: God is a sucker for gratitude. And if you are truly grateful for today's sobriety, you just bought tomorrow's. Now, what is gratitude? It's not just a feeling. It's a willingness to pass on to somebody else what God has given to you. And then we come to prayer. Prayer has become the subject of a whole lot of AA meetings, as you're well aware. A lot of the emphasis, since many people have been so hungry for the grace of God, and they finally get it, it's given to them to get sober, they speak about all the wonderful things that come through prayer. Ask, and you shall receive. But I think the importance in staying sober is switching the emphasis to ask, and you shall receive. Now, we have to pay a little bit of attention to what we're asking for and our obligations in the God-man relationship. One time there was a little farm kid, and every night he was sent down the path to the mailbox to bring the evening paper in, for his dad. And one night he just forgot. So they ate dinner, and of course the sun had long since gone down. It was in the wintertime. And his mother said, "Now you have forgotten the paper. Go on down, get the paper for your father." And he began to drag his feet, skirt all around the place. He just put it off and put it off. And finally, in anger, she said, "Go get the paper." And he burst into tears. And his mother said, "What's wrong?" "I just asked you to get the paper." And he just broke down. He said, "Mom, I've never told anybody, but I'm scared to death of the dark." He said, "I'm just afraid of the dark." And she put her arms around him, took him up on her lap. She tried to explain that there's nothing to be afraid of, that the yard is the same in the dark as it is in the light. And she said, God is everywhere, and He's out there in the dark too, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Kid lit up like a Christmas tree. Walked to the door, opened it, stuck his hand out, and asked God to hand him the newspaper. Well, God will not make anyone sober. God will not keep anyone sober. God says, I'll give you the strength to not drink if you do these things. Another thing is recognizing the answer to your prayers when they come. They usually come through other human beings. I once was at a taping of a Bob Hope show, and where there was a lull, they had some correction to do. He just stood and told this joke to the audience. I was there. It was during the flood waters, the hurricanes or the storm winds from the Pacific that lashed Malibu. And he said this fellow was standing on the roof of his home, and the water was up to his ankles. The house was underwater. And a fellow came by in a helicopter, and he dropped a line. He said, grab this, I'll get you out of here. No, he said, I have an arrangement with God. 20 minutes later, the water's up to here. Rowboat came by. He said, jump in, I'll get you to high ground. Hey, he said, I have an arrangement with God. Half hour later, he's dead. The water's 8 feet over his head. He's drowned. His soul gets up to heaven, and he's miffed. He really is miffed. And when he found God, he said, where were you? I thought we had an arrangement. And God looked at him. He says, I sent a helicopter and a rowboat. Now, I think there's a whole lot more wisdom in that little story than is apparent. Obviously, it's a funny story. But I wonder how often we keep asking God for favors and He's already answered them. He's already answered them. He said, I put the answer here. It's in your sponsor. I put the answer here. It's in your meetings. You're kicking them all away, saying, I want another arrangement. Well, it doesn't happen that way. I think that the most frightening words an alcoholic can hear came from the heart and the pen of Bill Wilson. He wrote these words, be on guard against the unguarded moment. And he promised that in the life of the alcoholic, there will come a time or times when absolutely nothing stands between the alcoholic and a drink except his AA instinct that will make him say no. And that's the result of a whole lot of years of meetings, some of which were boring. It's a result of a whole lot of years of trying to help drunks, some of whom survived and some of whom died. But it's a buildup of this strength that will enable the alcoholic almost blindly to say no and run. Be on guard against that moment. Cockiness, complacency, irritability, all can militate against that. You know the one word we have on walls? Think. Think a drink through to the end. If people were intellectually capable of doing that, climbing over their emotions and their desire to drink, the thought of where the drink would ultimately lead would prevent every relapse. But it is so hard to do. It is so hard to be rational in an irrational, emotional situation. I once heard a man say, this is scary. I know I have another drunk left in me. I don't know if I have another return. And I heard a man say, not too long ago, listen to this. It had a profound effect on my own thinking. If I take a drink, all my tomorrows are up for grabs. And boy, they are. How do we look on people who are repeaters? How should we look on people who relapse time after time after time, who do not do what they're supposed to, who just keep getting drunk? Have you ever heard these words? Hey, did you hear about so-and-so? He's drunk again. Almost happily. One of the greatest evils, really, that I've ever noticed among so-called recovered alcoholics is almost a joy at announcing that someone is drinking again. That's scary. It really is. That's scary. I believe this thing is a terminal disease, and I believe that anyone who suffers a relapse should be treated with nothing but compassion, sorrow, pity, and prayer. Let no man or woman alive ever look at an unfortunate fellow human being who has a relapse without seriously thinking the words, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." I have taken, in recent years, the very last words of my night prayers. I pray for those who are still drinking and for those who are in relapse. For whatever reason. For whatever reason. Many people say I prayed and my prayers were not answered. Many people, I am sure, have loved ones that they're praying for, and the prayers seemingly are unanswered. There's another saying in AA, let go and let God. But somehow or other, sometimes we tend really not to let go. We tend not to let God. For those who have had relapse and say they are trying, just close your eyes and say, I'm in your hands. I'm in the hands of those who would help me. I will do whatever you ask. I will do whatever is asked of me. It's a hard thing to do, but I believe that, as the saints called it, abandonment to the will of God can work the miraculous in the lives of the relapser. But so often, this happens, this beautiful thing. It came to me from a friend whom I've known for many years, a fellow by the name of Joe Golden in St. Louis. Listen to this. I believe this is important. As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because He was my friend. But then, instead of leaving Him in peace to work alone, I hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last I snatched them back and cried, "How can you be so slow?" "My child," he said, "what could I do? You never did let go." Thank you, and good night.